Okay, now, what still stands? Let me have you conceptualize the law like this. This is what I was taught when I was growing up. This is what I was taught, okay? And I think it's useful, but not totally useful, and you'll see me critique it and stuff in a minute, but just think through this. People take the law, the 5 books of Moses, and they say certain parts of the law of Moses are civil laws. They're civil laws. They're laws for the government. They're laws for the government. Do you need law? Does a government need laws? A government needs laws, okay, unless you're an anarchist or something, but the government needs laws, okay? One of the laws that Israel had was that if you had a house and you had a flat roof, all their houses are flat roofs, that you put a parapet around you put a little wall around the roof of your house. Now, why would you do that? Yeah, so if the person's up there, they just don't go walk and bam, fall off your roof and then hurt themselves and stuff. So the law, you were required by the law to put a parapet around the house. By the way, do you see that is a safety requirement that a nation would want, saying so people don't get hurt on that? And by the way, is that so far-fetched? Now, how many of you put a parapet around your roof? Now you say, we live in New England. All our roofs are like this. Why are our roofs like this? Yeah, the rain runs down, and what's worse than the rain sometimes? The snow goes off your roof. Question, you got a flat roof in New England, have you got a problem? Oh, no, seriously. Just look at Frost Hall, okay? So what you want is like this. So question, do we need parapets around our roofs? None of you go up to meditate on your roof, do you? Or actually, I've been up on top of my roof. I've got a real steep roof. It's about 50 feet up there. And I've sat right on the top of the thing, and I was actually nailing on shingles. My shingles came off, and so I had to nail it down upside down. There was nobody there to help me. And I realized if I fell, it was one of the few times in my life where I'm not usually afraid of heights. And I realized that none of my kids are around, so if I did fall, there was no one there to help me. And so it was kind of a different thing for me at this age of my life. That stuff, I'm thinking twice about heights now, which is disgusting. Anyway, so now, civil law. Now, let me go back to this. I've got a neighbor. Now, question, what about this parapet around the roof? We said we don't have. Our roofs are all like this now. Okay, our roofs are. What about my neighbor's got a pool? My neighbor's got a pool. Question, does he have to put a fence around his yard to protect so the kid doesn't walk over and fall in the pool? Is that is that pretty much the same law, to protect people from harm? And as a homeowner, are you responsible to make sure people don't get hurt on your property? And so they put a fence around a pool today, and it's very similar to the same type of law. So there are civil laws, okay? There are civil laws. These are for the government. Now, question, are you the government? Do you have to follow those laws? We're not really the government. The Jews also had ceremonial laws. Ceremonial laws are what? The laws of the priests and Levites. This is how you do sacrifices, how you do feasts, What was the word we used for the rituals? We would use in English these words rituals. The rituals are prescribed in the law, the rituals that the priests go through. What was the other word that we used in Old Testament circles? It's a real important word in Old Testament today. The ceremonial or the ritual we call what? The cult in the Old Testament. Remember we used that word cult in the Old Testament? The cult is these external acts of worship, the rituals that you go through, and that's the ceremonial law. Now question, how many of you have sacrificed anything lately? Okay? I mean like a real, like sheep and goats. Okay? Do we do the ceremonial laws anymore? Are we priests and Levites? Is the temple gone? The temple's gone, right? The altar's gone. So we don't do the ceremonial laws and that kind of stuff. So the civil laws are governmental laws. We're not really government. The ceremonial laws has to do with the priests and their sacrifices. We're not really. So what do we focus on? In the Old Testament, we focus on the moral law. Now, are there certain parts of the law of the Old Testament that are moral? Like, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie. Are those moral precepts? Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, these types of things. And so what happens here is a lot of people divide the law into three categories. Is this law civil? Is this law ceremonial? or is this law moral? And then what the suggestion is, we don't necessarily keep these first two, but the third one, the moral law of God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. We keep the moral law. And so that's important there, okay? So we segment the law, and then how do we transfer the law over? We transfer the law over just the moral part of that law, okay? Does that make sense then? Yeah. Does this make the law easier to handle? Because we've got the civil law, that's for nations, we're not nations. Ceremonial, priests, we're not priests. And the moral law, that's what we follow. Okay, that's what I was taught growing up. Now let me critique that a little bit. My problem with this is, how do you determine whether a law is a civil, ceremonial, or a moral law? Sometimes are the ceremonial laws linked in with moral laws. Does the book of the law, Moses' first 5 books of the Bible, does it come to us as an organic whole? It comes to us organically connected. You just can't rip things off and put them into categories like that. Okay? You just can't rip. When you start ripping them apart and say, well, this is civil, this is ceremonial, and this is moral, you're dissecting the law. You can't do that. The thing is moral. Okay? All right? In other words, it's immoral to do that. You can't just break things apart like that. Is putting a parapet around your wall, is that a moral issue? Yeah, actually it is. It's part of your responsibility as one that owns a home. So it's partially civil, but it's partially moral as well. Okay, so what I'm suggesting is that this categorization here does not, it violates the organic connection, the organic unity, the interaction with Scripture with itself. And while I like, are these categories useful? Are these categories useful? Okay? The categories are useful, but I think you got to be real careful lest it leads to dissecting, splitting up and dissecting the law and stuff. So to be honest with you, I like some of the idea of this, but you got to be careful, back it off some. Now, here's a better way, I think, of coming at this stuff, is what is the underlying universal principle? What is the underlying universal principles of the law? For example, care for the poor. Is care for the poor in the Old Testament good? Is care for the poor in the New Testament good? Yes. And so you get these more universal principles. Love God, be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Are these universal principles? So what you do is you look at those universal principles that are transcultural. They go beyond culture, and they work in whatever culture. Each culture will manifest it differently, but it's basically the underlying principle will work in every culture and stuff.